Today we're going to be working on solving one-step equations, but today we're going to look at multiplication and division equations. So go ahead and open up your notebook to the next available page. You can put today's date at the top. And then this is going to be topic 4, lesson 4, solve one-step equations. And I'm going to put multiplication and division in parentheses because those are the types of equations we're going to focus on today. So we're going to still follow the same rules that we talked about yesterday, and we're going to show our work in a very similar way where whatever we do to one side, we also make sure we do to the other side. That way our equation stays balanced. So we're going to start with multiplication equations. All right, so our first example is going to be negative 3w equals 453. So just like with adding and subtracting equations, we're going to try to isolate our variable. And so right now we know that negative 3 times some number is going to equal 453. We want to figure out what w is. So I'm going to box that in, draw my line for my equal sign, so that I remember whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So the idea here is we want to get w by itself. And really what we always want to do is kind of undo what happened to the variable. So originally in this equation, w was multiplied by negative 3. So to undo multiplication, I can use the inverse or opposite operation, and I can divide by that same number. So we use the fraction bar to show division when we're working with equations, and so I'm going to divide by that same number, negative 3. And I'm going to show you how that helps us get w by itself. Now, for this equation to stay balanced, whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I'm also going to show dividing the other side by negative 3. Okay, so on the left side here, if I have negative 3 divided by negative 3, well, that's the same as just 1. And then I can bring down my w. And then over here, you can work out the division. So go ahead, work it out. 453 divided by negative 3. And you can pause the video and then press play when you are ready. So I have a positive divided by a negative number, so I know my answer is negative. And when I divide those out, that gives me 151. Well, we wanted the variable by itself, not with something else. But if you think about it, 1 times w, well, 1 times any number is itself. So that means 1 times w is itself, which would be w. So this is the same as just w equals negative 151. So essentially when we divide it by negative 3, those negative 3's canceled out. You don't have to show this intermediate step unless it helps you. I'm showing you that this first time so that you can kind of understand why that isolates the variable. All right, now we just need to check our work. So remember we use substitution to check our answer. So I'm going to substitute negative 151 in for w by multiplying it by negative 3 to see if we get 453. So I need to do negative 151 times negative 3. Well, a negative times a negative, that's a positive. So I'm just going to go ahead and multiply. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. So I get 453, which is what I wanted, so I know I solved it correctly. Okay, so to solve a multiplication equation, basically we're using division, the opposite or inverse operation. Let's look at one more multiplication equation. So for this one, we have negative 1,608 equals negative 12d. Okay, so my goal is to isolate the variable, so I'm going to box that in, draw my line. I see that originally the variable was multiplied by negative 12, so to undo that, or to isolate the variable, I need to do the opposite. So I need to divide by that same number, negative 12. And whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. so go ahead and divide this out, negative 1,608 by negative 12. I know that a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so I'm just going to focus on the division. 12 won't go into 1, but it goes into 16 once. And I have 4 left over. And then 12 will go into 43 times. And 12 times 3 is 36. Bring down my 8. And 12 will go into 48 4 times. Alright, so we get 134. And then over here, remember, when we have negative 12 divided by itself, that's 1. That cancels out because 1 times anything is itself. So we end up with D equals 134. Okay, let's check our work off to the side here. So I'm going to use substitution and put 134 in for D. So I'm going to have to multiply 134 and negative 12. So I know a positive times a negative is a negative, so my answer is going to be negative. Now I'm just going to focus on the multiplication. So 2 times 4 is 8, 2 times 3 is 6, and 2 times 1 is 2. Bring down my 0 as a placeholder. 1 times 4 is 4, 1 times 3 is 3, and 1 times 1 is 1. Okay, so I'm going to add those together. And so I end up with 1,608, negative 1,608, which is exactly what I wanted. So we solved that correctly. Okay, let's switch gears and look at a division equation. So you can go ahead, title this part Division Equations. So for number 3 here, we're going to have x over negative 7. And you'll notice I left some room here. I did that on purpose. So x over negative 7 equals 63. Hey, be careful here because a lot of times people look at this and really quickly they say, oh, okay, I know the answer is going to be negative 9. You want to be careful though because if you look at what this equation is saying, it's saying that if you take a number and divide it by negative 7, it will equal 63. So just like before, I'm going to box in my variable. I want to isolate that, draw my line. So originally in the equation, x was divided by negative 7. Well, I need to undo that. And the opposite or the inverse of division is multiplication. So I need to multiply by the same number I divided by. So I'm going to multiply both sides of my equation by negative 7. Now on the left side, there's 2 ways to think of this. If I have any number and if I divide it by negative 7, but then I go back and I just multiply by the exact same number, we end up right back where we started, which would be x. The other way to think of this is to think of these as 2 fractions. So negative 7 over 1 multiplied by x over negative 7. If you multiply that out, you're going to end up with also just x. So it's up to you how you think of it, but either way, your negative 7s will cancel out. And then if you multiply this out, a positive times a negative is a negative. And you can do multiplication off to the side if you need to. 7 times 3 is 21. 7 times 6 is 42. Plus 2 is 44. So we get negative 441 for x. All right, I'm going to check my work. So I want to make sure that if I divide x by negative 7, I get 63. So that would be negative 441 divided by negative 7. A negative divided by negative is a positive, so now I just can focus on my division. 7 goes into 44 6 times. And 7 goes into 21 3 times. So we end up with 63, which is what we were hoping for, so it checks out. All right, our last example we're going to do with division is negative 45 equals c over negative 9. Okay, so box in your variable, draw your line. So this time I see that the variable was divided by negative 9. So to undo division, I need to multiply by that same number, negative 9. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So over here, a negative times a negative is a positive. So I just need to multiply 45 and 9 to see what that equals. And so I end up with 405. Over here, my negative 9's cancel out, and I'm left with C. So C equals 405. Okay, let's check our work using substitution. So I want to make sure that 405 divided by negative 9 really equals negative 45. Well, positive times a negative is a negative. Now I can just focus on my division. 9 will go into 40 4 times. Bring down my 5, and then 9 will go into 45 5 times. So I end up with negative 45, which checks out. So with multiplication and division equations, the idea is still the same. You want to isolate the variable, and to do that, you can use the inverse or opposite operation from what was originally used, and we always use that same number that was next to the variable. Make sure as you're working these problems out that you are showing all of your steps correctly as shown in your notes.